Picture this. Christmas morning, a warm living room filled with wrapping paper, laughter, and expensive gifts. An 81-year-old grandmother sits quietly in the corner, watching her 4 grandchildren tear open boxes. iPhones, designer handbags, gaming consoles, jewelry. Then she reaches into her worn purse and pulls out 4 simple white envelopes. Inside each envelope is $200 cash. Her grandchildren look at the money, then they look at each other, and then they laugh. One of them actually says, "That is it, Grandma? 200 bucks? Uncle Richard just gave me a $3,000 watch." She says nothing. She just smiles, nods, and quietly puts her hands back in her lap. 3 months later, she is dead. And when the lawyer reads her will, those grandchildren discover something that changes everything. Something hidden inside those envelopes that they never bothered to find. A secret worth $2.3 million. This is the true story of Dorothy Mae Patterson, a grandmother from Cartersville, Georgia, who taught her family the most expensive lesson of their lives. And I promise you, you will not see this ending coming. Before I tell you what was hidden in those envelopes, I need to ask you something. If you are new here, this channel tells stories like this one. Real stories about real families. Stories about betrayal, redemption, and the moments that define who we truly are. If that is something you want more of, take 1 second and hit subscribe. I know everyone asks that, but here's why I'm asking you. Every subscriber helps this video reach someone who needs to hear it. Maybe someone who feels forgotten by their own family right now. Maybe someone who has been laughed at for not being rich enough. Maybe someone who needs to know that quiet people often have the loudest last words. So subscribe, tap the bell, and let us dive into Dorothy's story. Because what happened in that living room on Christmas morning was only the beginning. Cartersville, Georgia. Population 21,000. A small town about 45 minutes northwest of Atlanta. The kind of place where people wave at strangers, church bells ring on Sunday mornings, and families still sit on front porches drinking sweet tea in the summer. Dorothy Mae Patterson was born there in 1942. She never left. Her entire life fit within a 20-mile radius of the house she was born in. She married her high school sweetheart, Walter, at age 19. They bought a modest 3-bedroom home on Maple Street for $11,000. They raised 2 children, a daughter named Linda and a son named James. Walter worked at the textile mill for 37 years. Dorothy worked part-time at the local library and spent the rest of her time raising her babies, cooking Sunday dinners, and volunteering at the Baptist church. They were never rich, but they were never poor either. They had enough, and for Dorothy, enough was always plenty. Walter passed away in 2009 from lung cancer. He was 68 years old. Dorothy was 67. For the next 14 years, Dorothy lived alone in that little house on Maple Street. She tended her garden, she read her books, she went to church every Sunday without fail. And she waited. Waited for her grandchildren to visit, waited for phone calls that rarely came, waited to feel like she still mattered. But here is the thing about Dorothy that nobody knew. Not her children, not her grandchildren, not even her closest friends. Dorothy Mae Patterson was secretly worth over $2 million. Now, I know what you are thinking. How does a librarian and a mill worker's widow end up with $2 million? Here is the answer. In 1973, Walter Patterson made a decision that would change everything. His coworker at the mill kept talking about a company called Walmart, some discount store chain that was expanding across the South. Walter took $500 from their savings and bought stock. Dorothy was furious. $500, Walter. That's 2 months of groceries. You put it in some store?" Walter just smiled and said, "Dot, trust me, just this once." She did not speak to him for 3 days, but she never sold those shares. Over the next 50 years, those $500 in Walmart stock grew and grew and grew. Stock splits, dividends, reinvestments. By the time Walter died in 2009, that investment was worth $1.4 million. Dorothy never touched it. She kept living in the same house, driving the same old Buick, wearing the same clothes from Goodwill, shopping at the same grocery store with coupons. Nobody knew. Not Linda, not James, not a single soul. The only person who knew the truth was Dorothy's lawyer, a man named Harold Fisher, who had been managing her affairs for 22 years. "Mrs. Patterson," Harold said once, "you could travel the world, buy a new house, live comfortably." Dorothy shook her head. "Harold, money does not change who people are. It just reveals who they already were. And before I die, I need to know who my grandchildren really are." She had a plan, and that plan involved 4 white envelopes with $200 each. Now let me introduce you to Dorothy's family, because this is where things get complicated. Dorothy had 2 children, Linda and James. Linda, the eldest, married a man named Richard Davenport in 1987. Richard was a corporate attorney from Atlanta. Big house, country club membership, 3 luxury cars in the driveway. Linda changed after she married Richard. She stopped visiting Cartersville, stopped calling on weekends, stopped bringing her children to see Grandma. She was embarrassed. Embarrassed by the small house, the old furniture, the way Dorothy still hung laundry on a clothesline in the backyard. "Mama, you could at least get a dryer," Linda said once. "Why?" Dorothy replied. "The sun is free." Linda and Richard had 2 children, Bradley and Megan. Bradley was 28, worked at his father's law firm, drove a BMW, had never worked a hard day in his life. Megan was 25, Instagram influencer, spent more on handbags than most people spend on rent. Now, Dorothy's son James was different. James stayed in Cartersville. He married a woman named Susan and worked as an electrician. They lived a modest life and had 2 children of their own, Emily and Thomas. Emily was 23, just graduated from nursing school, still drove her grandmother's old Buick that Dorothy had gifted her. Thomas was 20, worked construction while taking night classes at community college. Every Sunday, Emily visited Dorothy, without fail. She would bring groceries, sit on the porch, and listen to Dorothy's stories for hours. "Grandma, tell me about Grandpa again," Emily would say, and Dorothy would smile and say, "Baby girl, your Grandpa Walter was the richest man I ever knew, not because of money, because of heart." Emily never forgot those words. But Bradley and Megan, they visited once a year, maybe, and only because their mother forced them. Christmas was the only time the whole family gathered, and Christmas 2022 was about to become the most important day in all their lives. December 25th, 2022. The Davenport Mansion. Linda insisted on hosting Christmas, not because she wanted to see her mother, but because she wanted to show off the new renovation. Marble floors, crystal chandelier, a 12-foot Christmas tree decorated by a professional designer. Dorothy arrived in her old Buick. She was wearing the same green dress she wore every Christmas for the past 15 years. Sensible shoes, a simple pearl necklace Walter gave her on their 20th anniversary. Linda opened the door and immediately looked at the car in the driveway. "Mama, you really need to get rid of that thing. It is embarrassing." "Good morning to you too, Linda," Dorothy said quietly. Inside, the family was already gathered. Richard sat in his leather armchair like a king on a throne, swirling whiskey in a crystal glass. Bradley was showing off his new Rolex to his father, Megan was taking selfies in front of the Christmas tree. Thomas and Emily sat on the couch, looking uncomfortable. James and Susan stood awkwardly near the kitchen, like guests in their own sister's home. Dorothy walked in and looked around. Nobody stood up to greet her. Nobody hugged her. Bradley glanced up from his phone and said, "Oh, hey, Grandma, Merry Christmas," or whatever. That was it. Dorothy sat down in the corner seat, the smallest seat in the room, and watched. She watched Bradley brag about his bonus at the law firm. She watched Megan complain that her father only bought her the smaller Chanel bag instead of the large one. She watched Linda laugh at everything Richard said like he was the funniest man alive. And she watched Emily quietly help Susan carry dishes to the table when nobody thanked her. Then came the gift exchange. Richard stood up like a game show host. "All right, everyone, gift time. Let us see what Santa brought this year." One by one, the expensive gifts were distributed. Bradley received a $3,000 Omega watch from Richard. He put it on immediately and admired himself in the mirror. Megan received a $5,000 Louis Vuitton bag from Linda. She squealed and immediately posted it on Instagram. Thomas received a gift card to Home Depot, $50 from Richard. "For your little construction hobby," Richard said with a smirk. Emily received nothing from Linda and Richard, not even a card. Then it was Dorothy's turn. She reached into her worn leather purse and pulled out 4 white envelopes, handwritten names on each one. "I do not have much," Dorothy said softly, "but I wanted each of my grandchildren to have something from me this year." She handed an envelope to Bradley. He opened it, pulled out 10 $20 bills, counted them, and then he laughed. Actually laughed. $200, Grandma? That's it? Megan opened hers next. Same thing. $200 cash. She didn't even try to hide her disappointment. "Mom," Megan whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "this wouldn't even cover my nails." Bradley chimed in. "Grandma, no offense, but Uncle Richard just gave me a watch worth more than your car. Maybe next year just don't worry about it." Richard chuckled. Linda looked away, pretending not to hear. The room fell silent. Dorothy said nothing. Thomas opened his envelope next, $200. He looked at his grandmother and said, "Thank you, Grandma. I really appreciate it." Dorothy smiled at him softly. Emily opened hers last, $200, but unlike the others, she stood up, walked over to Dorothy, and hugged her. "Grandma, this means so much. Thank you. I love you." Dorothy whispered in her ear, "Keep it somewhere safe, baby. Promise me?" Emily was confused but nodded. "I promise." Later that night, Emily put the $200 inside her Bible on her nightstand. She didn't know why. It just felt right. Bradley spent his $200 that same week on a dinner date. Megan used hers on a manicure. Thomas spent his on textbooks for his night class. And Emily never touched it. After Christmas, Dorothy went quiet. She stopped calling Linda, stopped hoping Bradley and Megan would visit, but every Sunday, Emily still came. One Sunday in February, Emily noticed something different. Dorothy seemed tired, slower. Her eyes looked distant. "Grandma, are you okay?" Dorothy took Emily's hand. "Baby, I want you to know something. Everything I ever did, I did because I love this family, even when they didn't love me back. That's what love is. It doesn't keep score." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Grandma, please don't talk like that." Dorothy smiled. "I'm not going anywhere yet, but when I do, remember what I said. Check your Bible." 3 weeks later, Dorothy Mae Patterson passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 81 years old. Before we get to the funeral and the will, I need to ask a small favor. If you know someone who has ever felt overlooked by their family, if you know a grandmother or grandfather who gives everything and receives nothing in return, please share this video with them. Not for me, for them. Because sometimes people need to hear that their kindness is not wasted, that quiet love still matters, that one day the truth always comes out. So hit that share button. Send this to someone who needs it. Now, let's get to the will reading, because this is where everything changes. The funeral was held at Cartersville Baptist Church, the same church Dorothy attended for 60 years. Over 200 people came, neighbors, church friends, former library co-workers, people whose lives Dorothy had quietly touched without ever asking for anything in return. Linda sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. But Emily noticed something. Her tears seemed rehearsed. After the service, the family gathered at Harold Fisher's law office for the reading of the will. Everyone expected a simple process. Dorothy was a poor widow. What could she possibly have to leave behind? Harold Fisher sat behind his desk, a thick folder in front of him. Thank you all for coming. Before I read the will, I must inform you of something. He paused. Dorothy Mae Patterson's estate is valued at approximately $2.3 million. The room went silent. Glenda gasped. What? That is impossible. Mama barely had enough to pay her electric bill. Richard leaned forward, suddenly very interested. Harold continued. Mrs. Patterson was a very private woman. She accumulated this wealth over 5 decades through careful investment and frugal living. She never touched the principal. She wanted it to go to her grandchildren. Bradley smiled. Well, that is more like it. 4 grandchildren, so that is what, almost $600,000 each? Harold shook his head. Not quite. Mrs. Patterson left very specific instructions. He opened the folder and read aloud. I, Dorothy Mae Patterson, being of sound mind, leave my entire estate to the grandchild or grandchildren who still possess the $200 I gave them on Christmas Day 2022, untouched, unspent, exactly as Dorothy gave them. Harold smiled softly. Miss Emily Patterson, you are the sole heir of Dorothy Mae Patterson's estate, the full $2.3 million. Emily collapsed into tears, not tears of joy for the money, tears of grief, because she finally understood what Dorothy meant that Sunday afternoon. Check your Bible. Dorothy knew. She knew Emily was the only one who would keep it, not because she wanted the money, but because she loved her grandmother more than what her grandmother could give her. Bradley stormed out of the office. Megan screamed at her mother for not teaching her how to behave. Linda tried to contest the will. She failed. Emily used part of the money to pay off her student loans and buy a small house in Cartersville, 2 streets away from the house on Maple Street where Dorothy lived her whole life. She kept the house exactly as it was, the garden, the clothesline, the old rocking chair on the porch. And every Sunday, Emily sits on that porch with sweet tea, looking at the sunset, remembering the grandmother who taught her that love is not measured in dollars. It is measured in presence, in patience, in showing up when no one else does. Dorothy Mae Patterson never got the respect she deserved while she was alive, but in the end, she had the last word, and that word was worth $2.3 million. Dorothy left one more thing in her will, a handwritten letter for Emily. It said, "Baby girl, if you are reading this, it means you kept the gift, not because of what was inside, but because it came from me. That is all I ever wanted. Someone who loved me for me. You were the richest gift I ever received. Now go live your life and never forget, true wealth is not in your bank account. It is in your heart. I love you forever. Grandma Dot. This has been a true story of love, loss, and legacy. If it touched your heart, you know what to do. Subscribe, share, and I'll see you in the next one.